Hey, this is Pastor Curry, pastor of the East Zion Fair Baptist Church, Wilmington's most exciting church, the church that loves you and ain't a thing you can do about it. This is our time with Coffee with Pastor Curry. We have a very, very special guest today as we continue to explore the various options that we have to provide you quality programming. We're going to definitely interview today our very, very special guest in the political world, and I'm excited. He's my friend. He's also a great warrior, and I hope and trust that you will stay tuned so that you will be able to enjoy this interview that I'm about to have with this amazing, internationally known individual. Stay tuned. Go grab your cup of coffee. It's time to get at it with Dr. Curry with a cup of coffee. God bless you. And we're back. Just as I told you, we have a special guest, Chris Coons, our senator from the state of Delaware, a friend, a supporter of not only just our interests in society, but he is also a fellow brother in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we're very happy to have him with us today, and it is an honor. It is a privilege to have you, Chris, with us today. And all that is going on right now, for you to take time out to come over here to South Bridge and be a part of this time of Coffee with Curry, we say thank you.
Thank you. It's a blessing to be with you again. I have so enjoyed my time with you, with your congregation, with your family. You are a source of refreshment and encouragement, someone who I just love having as a fellow for this journey, because it is a challenging time. I think this is a time that's testing all of us in terms of our hope, our faith, our optimism, and I'd welcome a chance to hear from you as well about what it's like to pastor now in the midst of these three incredible crises happening at the same time.
Yeah, and thank you. And at some point, I'm sure in our conversation today, we will certainly try to tag into those. But I want to say that during this season, you're absolutely right. So much is going on, and to have fellow brothers and sisters who are in the same hope that we are in is very refreshing. I want to say, though, I called you in today because you have been a friend to us. You have been a friend to the South Bridge community, to the Wilmington community, to Delaware. Your heart is large. Your heart is real. 2 times you have spoken here as our minister for our Scholarship Sundays. Recently, you spoke here for our Centennial Scholarship event and tore the house down. I thought that it was a African-American minister who was bringing the word that day, but you did a phenomenal job, and I'm very appreciative for that. Let me also share one more thing. After we had our service in the African-American tradition, we have food. Well, I don't know whether the wife failed to feed you that day or what, but you ate the food as if you had not eaten anything that good in a very long time.
I had not eaten anything that good in a while, and it was fantastic. I loved it. We were here for a couple of hours, and it was delightful. Right. It was just fabulous.
Yes, and thank you so very much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Let's get into a few of the questions that I have for you today. One, help me, because a lot of people see you as senator. They see you as Chris Coons, the senator, the one down in Washington who is working and fighting for the little man. But there was a formation that happened, or you was created to become who you are through your faith, through your family. Talk to me a little bit about Chris Coons, the person, the making of Chris Coons.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate everything you just said. I grew up in Hockessin. I grew up as a member of Red Clay Presbyterian, a church that laid the foundation for a strong faith journey in a family that laid that foundation, but where, boy, if you'd run into me as a college-age young man, I wasn't sure where I was going. I wasn't sure exactly what were the footings I was going to rest on or where I was going to go. Many of us go through a period of exploration as young adults. I have 3 kids of my own who are in college, and it is so hard as a parent to watch the choices they make and the things they do, and to nudge and encourage and direct enough, but not command in a way that will just drive them further away. So as we've talked about before, I was active in a Christian students group at college. I went to worship with some regularity, but not as much as my mother and grandmother would have liked. But I spent a semester in Kenya, in East Africa, my junior year, and it challenged me and changed me and pushed me in ways that I didn't anticipate, but that really altered the direction of my life. I remember one moment in particular. I was in a town called Ngong, east of Nairobi, at Presbyterian Church, actually. Very different from the very formal and frozen and stiff Presbyterian church I'd grown up in. And at 3 different points in the course of what was a 4-hour service, we started at 9, we ended at 1, roughly. And at different points, the pastor felt like the village wasn't awake enough, people weren't engaged enough, and so there was just a spontaneous, everybody got up and we processed out and we walked all the way through this entire village with flags and drums and shouting and just get people engaged.
Right.
And each time we got the harvest was a little bit more. And there was a guest preacher that day. And at one point, someone who was sitting next to me on a rough-hewn pew turned to me and said, "Are you a missionary?" Because there were no white people around. I was the only white person in the whole congregation. And I said, "No, ma'am." And she said, "Well, we're used to having folks like you come and visit as missionaries." I said, "No, honestly, the church I grew up in needs a missionary from here. I've never seen such passion, such heart, such engagement." And by the narrow frame that I'd been raised in, I was worshiping with and visiting with people who we might call poor from an American perspective, materially poor, but incredibly powerfully spiritually rich. And the family I was staying with prayed morning, noon, and night over everything and were grateful for everything and were so welcoming and open-hearted. And it really challenged me because I realized I'd grown up with a lot of these same hymns, same words, same worship, but without any sense of joy. Wow. Without any of the sense of the abundance of the Spirit. And I don't mean to give too long a commentary on it, but I had on a beach in Lamu, which is an island off of Kenya, the sort of spiritual awakening that folks talk about, a physical sense of the presence of God that really tested me and challenged me and made me rethink about my priorities and my commitments in life. I went back to Kenya and to South Africa several years later, and a woman who I met at that church in Ngong, Zipporah Kamau, had asked if I might help her with launching an orphanage, and Zipporah and I became good friends. My first visit back to Kenya as a senator, 30 years later. Before I went, I said to my wife, "Boy, I'm digging through all these old books, trying to find her contact information, which I'd written in a diary from years before." She says, "Try Facebook." I type in Zipporah Kamau.
And there it is.
And there it is.
Wow.
And the orphanage that she founded in Ngong is now this huge complex with buildings and hundreds of students. And, over the arc of my life, we had children, I got married, I'd fallen out of touch with her. And we got to have this joyful reunion that was just remarkable. I've seen God's Spirit do amazing things here in Delaware, there in Kenya, in the hearts of my colleagues, in our community. And it was only later as a parent that I really realized the ways in which my own parents had done quietly powerful things. My mom organized our church to welcome a refugee family from South Vietnam. This was 74, maybe 75, I guess, after the fall of Saigon, so maybe 75. Never talked about it. She didn't say, "Here's why I'm doing it." And my father, when I was quite young, I guess I was in early middle school, late elementary school, joined prison ministry and went to what was then DCC, is now Vaughn Correctional, and developed a relationship with a man who'd been convicted of murder and was serving a life sentence and was very withdrawn but very prayerful and very active in his faith. And my dad started bringing him home to our house for furlough weekends. He hadn't been out of prison in years. His own family had disowned him. And it was only when I was a father to 3 young children that I realized what a radical thing it was to do, to literally open our home and have him spending weekends with us. And that is scripturally based righteousness. It is taking risks for your faith that my parents never. They would be surprised. They were surprised when I started talking about this in recent years, because they just thought they were just sort of doing what you kind of ought to do. I have a friend, former senator named Jeff Flake.
Yes.
Jeff's LDS, Church of Latter-day Saints, what is commonly called Mormon. And I remember Jeff and I are exactly the same age, and he went to Zimbabwe on a Mormon mission. And the first time he and I traveled back together, we've been to both Nairobi, to both Kenya and to Zimbabwe. And he's met Zipporah Kamau, and I've met the family that hosted him when he was a missionary. And I said to him, I just don't understand. How could you do this? How could you learn a foreign language, walk all over rural Zimbabwe, walk up to people's doors, knock on their door, and say, I want to talk to you about Jesus? And he looked at me, and with all sincerity, he said, but if you've read the Gospels, and if you know that that is the single greatest gift you could ever give someone, how can you not?
Yes.
And I suddenly went, huh. So I've had these moments that, echo through my life, and that test and challenge me. My wife is Catholic. I'm Protestant. Choosing to proceed to get married together in the Catholic Church was quite something for me as a person who feels the significance of the Reformation and for whom the doctrines of our churches don't really align. But as I prayed over it, I'll get emotional. I kept saying, help me understand your will, help me see your path here. And I got this clear as day message, which was, you are fixating on where you're going to be 3 days. The day you're married, the day your children are confirmed, and the day you're buried. You're fixating on those 3 days. I've put in front of you someone who is righteous and who is faithful and who is meant to be with you all the other days. Quit the passage, I think it's in Romans, where there's a cloth that descends and he says, eat. He was saying, quit getting so fixated upon the form. Pay attention to the substance. I've given you a good and a kind and a righteous woman to be your partner. Shut up. Get over yourself. And I got it. Every now and then, I think God has a sense of humor. I think God has a sense of timing. I don't mean to be blasphemous in suggesting I know God's will, but at least in my life, there have been moments when I feel like he's just like banging on the glass going, are you watching this show? Are you paying any attention? And I try to have a sense of humility about ever saying that I have certainty about God's will for me, let alone my family, let alone our nation. But there are moments that I think it's so clear in Scripture, in the way that he moves through history. And I look forward to talking with you about that a little bit more.
Yeah, and as you
sorry
were
for that long answer.
No, that was an excellent opportunity for me to even know Chris Coons better. I thought being with you the 2 or 3 times that we were together in worship, because you even did something that was really unique, and I'm gonna remind you of it. When I had to preach a funeral of one of our firefighters who had been slain in fire. And you said, Pastor, you called me and said, is this appropriate for this event? And I said, the Senator of the United States is calling me, but that speaks to your heart for the gospel. Want to be in the right place. God says in Jeremiah 29, he says, I know the thoughts I have for you. When you were going through the whole trajectory of your wife and how you were just living for the 3, God has a plan for our lives, and what he wants us to do is trust him. When you were talking about the Matthew passage, I believe you was in the zone of don't take care of, he says, don't worry about tomorrow. know that I'm taking care of you today. He'll deal with the ravens and he'll take care of all that good stuff, but he wanted us to trust him, and it seems like you're doing it. People don't get a chance to see this. They don't get a chance to understand that even though you're in Washington with a lot of the scum that's there, I don't mean to use that word.
A lot of the mess.
I apologize.
A lot of the mess.
But with all of that's going on there, that it is your faith that drives you and keep you moving in the right direction. And we're appreciative to that. And I wanted to open up our time of conversation by talking about the man. What got you to where you are? You're not one who walks in front of a church and hold up a Bible and say, I'm a Christian. You've lived the life.
I'm trying.
Faith without you're living. So I'll put the ing on it. You're living the life, and none of us are perfect. The only person who is perfect is God, and that's why we continue to look to Him for grace and for mercy. This has been certainly refreshing for me. As a matter of fact, you took away all of my questions because not that you did it on purpose, but you did it because I got so engulfed in what you were sharing. And I want the people of E. Zion Fair, of the community, of all of our social media platforms, to know that Chris Coons is bigger than a senator. Especially those who believe and are believers. He's bigger than his title. He is a man of God, not saying that he is God, because we're not going that route. His humility will not even allow him to even think that way. But it's important that they understand that in you, we're getting more than a politician or a quote unquote a public servant. And we're very appreciative to that. Before we go to break, I just wanted to share with you that here at E. Zion Fair, we have a lot of friends. And your heart for the African American community, I now, today, discovered where it came from. You didn't just read about something in the history books. No. You lived that life, and you were able to identify. When you said from 9 until 1, I said that was an African American church. I said that was the black church, because that's what we do. And we are very charismatic. You've been in our services, but we are very appreciative. Listen, I want to take a moment and take a break, and we're going to come back. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Chris Coons, the senator, and we're going to talk a little bit about what he's been doing down there in Washington and what's going on down there as we return from this station identification. We'll be right back.
Welcome to E. Zion Fair. Thanks for tuning in. Check out this week's scoop.
And we're back. It has been refreshing to have this time of coffee with our Senator Chris Coons, our brother, our minister of the gospel. You get to choose what you want to call him today, but it has been refreshing. And even over the break, we had some good dialogue. So now I want to turn the corner a little bit and just try to get an understanding of what led you to the public service life.
Well, it's the kind of journey that looking back makes sense, but to me and certainly to my parents didn't make sense. I was doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. So I finished college and I go to Washington for a year, and I did research and writing about apartheid in South Africa. And a minister friend of mine, Reverend Bob Evans of Connecticut, invited me to go on a trip with a whole group to Kenya and South Africa. I did that. Another long story. I could fill in a lot of details, but in South Africa, I got to work and worship alongside some remarkable pastors. Desmond Tutu was one of them, Bayers Nodia, and many others. When I came back, a friend from here, from Wilmington, introduced me to a guy named Bob Hayes in New York who was running something called the Coalition for the Homeless. And this was in the late 80s, at a time when mass homelessness on the streets of all the major cities of our country had reemerged for the first time since the Depression. There were just thousands of people on the streets of New York. And so I did that work for most of a year, and it challenged me. I'm in Grand Central Station at night helping adult homeless men, many of whom had been on the streets for years. I'm staying in homeless shelters. When Bob sent me to Iowa and Michigan, and I went to 5 different states to help organize statewide coalitions. I was a young man. He says, well, you get a per diem for travel for $25 a day. I said, okay, that's great. And I came back 10 minutes later and I said, hang on a minute, where am I staying for $25 a day? And he points at the wall and he says, the name of the organization is? And I said, Coalition for the Homeless. He goes, where are they staying tonight?
Oh, wow.
I said, homeless shelters. He goes, that's where you're staying. He said, here's the rule. If they are full, you are not to stay there. I will call someone and get you a couch or but as much as possible for the next 6 months, I want you in homeless shelters, in Georgia, in Michigan, in New York. And it was a wonderful, powerful, challenging period. I was scared, I will tell you. I'd not spent time in homeless shelters, not just visiting, but staying. But the men I met and the insights I got and the lessons I learned, they see everything. And so many people in our country just walk right past folks who are homeless as if they're not really there, as if they're not human, as if they're not our brothers and sisters. There were relatively few homeless women at that point, but I'll never forget meeting this mom from central Iowa. She'd been burned out of her house. She and her son were living under a bridge in the back of a pickup truck. And her son was just he was a young man, but healthy, but he was defending his mom every night because a homeless woman on the street faces a lot of challenges. Anyway, that put me in touch with a ministry on the Eastern Shore called Common Ground. That was fascinating. Long story, how did I end up in public service? I ended up going to law school, and while in law school, going to divinity school as well. And while there in New Haven, representing a lot of homeless women and children in landlord-tenant court. And then coming back here, helping launch a nonprofit. This was a long journey. Ultimately, each of the issues I was involved in, whether it was running an AmeriCorps program that helped promote service, or housing and homelessness, or apartheid, and U.S. policy towards South Africa, in each case, government action was critical. Providing better access to affordable housing, providing better access to affordable education, having a foreign policy that put human rights and fighting racism above fighting with the Soviets and communism and fighting Marxism. In each case, government action was a key piece of it. So I got more and more involved in helping other people who were running for office, supporting and advising candidates for office. And the party chairman, the Democratic Party chairman, I'm a Democrat, the Democratic Party chairman came and asked me if I'd run for office in 1999. My wife and I had infant twins. I mean, they were like 9 months old. And I'm not a rude man usually, but I laughed in his face. I said, that's nuts. I don't want to be involved in county government. Oh, it's a mess. Yeah. And he said, yeah, that's exactly why we want you to do it, right? There's some challenges, some ethical challenges in the county government. I came home, talked to my wife, and she looks at me and she says, you've told me you grew up here. Yeah. And when your dad left and your mom was on her own, she was raising 3 boys by herself, where did she take you all the time? I said, the Kirkwood Library. She goes, Kirkwood Highway Library. I said, yeah. She goes, and whose was that? I said, she goes, that's a county library. I said, where are you going with this? And she said, in your youth group at your church, you guys went to the county park all the time. I said, yeah. She said, you told me a nice story about this county police officer who actually was encouraging and supportive when he could have treated you not well because you were being difficult as a young man. I said, yeah. She goes, do you realize that county government has helped you or supported you in some way over many, and you've never given a thing back? And I went, I think I know where this is going and I don't like it. She said, you need to run for county council president. It's the right thing for you to do. You need to start giving back. Well, I already had a full-time job. I was a lawyer for a company. Halfway through the campaign, we get pregnant. So we ended up with 3 kids under 3 And I had 2 full-time jobs, being county council president, representing 500,000 people. And I was still a lawyer for a company that expected me at my desk by 8 a.m. I'll never forget, no, I don't remember those 4 years. They were so busy, they were so intense. But within a few weeks of being elected and actually doing the job, you quickly realize whether you love it or hate it. And I loved going to civic association meetings, taking phone calls from people, trying to solve problems, trying to help fix the budget. It was difficult, it was frustrating, there were long hours, but I loved doing it. I just loved it. And I ended up doing 10 years in county government.
Wow. That's
on very daily issues. People's sewers backing up, people, trying to get their library fines cleared, trying to improve low-income housing for seniors. I mean, there's no end of good things to do that impact people in your community.
Yeah, so you served as the county president, council president for 4 years, and then you decided, well, I guess I'm needed a little
I'm
higher.
all in. No, then I did county executive for 6.
Yeah, well, is there any particular thing you would like to talk about with your county executive experience?
I could go on at way too long a length.
No, you can have it with us.
There were a lot of changes I thought needed to be made, and it was a difficult time, in no small part because halfway through my time was when the financial crisis happened in 08, 09,
Right.
and our revenue dropped by 1/3, and we had to make some really tough choices in terms of personnel and spending cuts and tax increases. And I went and did 13 town halls where I'd show up and we'd put out a case for 10 minutes about, here's the choices in front of me, right? Cut all of these services to the bone, or make these tough choices in terms of laying people off or cutting, expenses, or raising taxes. And I want to discuss this with you. And I'd have 100, 200 people. We'd be there 3-4 hours in some cases. And by the end of it, county council, the county workforce, we adopted a middle road that was a mix of cuts and tax increases. But I came away from that convinced I represent adults. That families sit down around the kitchen table and make hard choices all the time.
That's right.
Things don't work out. You get disappointed. You don't get the raise you expected. You have a sickness in your family. Your sister calls and she's been in a car accident. You have to send. People have to make hard choices all the time. So treat the people you represent like they're grown-ups. Put the choice in front of them. They'll make the right choice. So much of politics, people trying to act like it's all cuteness and games. It's not cuteness and games.
No.
It's hard choices.
Yes.
And I actually came out the other side of that, like more excited about doing it. Right. Even though, those were hard conversations.
Yes.
Those were not easy. We had to shut down things that people loved. We made some people very, very unhappy. But Americans, everybody's okay if they get heard.
Right.
If the process is fair,
that's the key.
If you are transparent.
Absolutely.
The first thing I did the year that we had the biggest budget shortfall, I announced that I was taking a 7% pay cut, and I was making I took a 10% pay cut, and I made my whole cabinet take a 7% pay cut because they were the highest paid county employees. Rule number 1. Ask your wife before you make an announcement like that. I came home and she was like, "You did what today?" That was really foolish on my part. She was 100% supportive. I don't mean to suggest she wasn't. She backed me up 100% on all these things. But I was very clear that what I was doing was asking other families to bear some of the pain. And boy, if you don't start by leading yourself, by doing it yourself, it doesn't go over well.
I have several members of our congregation who are county workers. And one of the things they said, I remember when I first announced that you were going to come the first time you came to preach for us, and they were very happy.
Good.
One of the things they said, and I didn't understand it then, but while you're talking, it did then, now that I'm getting an understanding, she said he leads by example.
I tried.
Which is very hard in government or in politics right now. And I didn't know how much, but the way she put it to me was that you said, before we cut anything, we're going to cut my salary. And I thought that was just awesome. And then she did share that you cut also some of your cabinet, not some of your cabinet salaries as well, and others joined in. But when people know that you in it with them, they tend to receive you better. And Americans are adults. As long as we're heard, we're willing to compromise, and that's really, really good. You had an opportunity to fill the shoes of a giant. I mean, you were the county exec, and you decided, I'm going to go for it.
Well, I'll tell you how that happened. So it's January of election year of 2010. I'm in my second term, and actually, I'll roll back just a little bit. So Christmas time the previous year, so it's 2009, and the Affordable Care Act. This is President Obama's first full year, and they are pushing and trying to get all sorts of things passed. And we'd almost never taken our kids to Washington. And Annie says, why don't we go down for a day? The kids have never seen the Capitol or Smithsonian. So we go down. And we called over to Senator Kaufman's office. He succeeded Joe Biden for 2 years. And we go up in the gallery, and we sit, and Senator Kaufman was presiding over the Senate. And I now know he broke the rules. You're not supposed to do this. He saw us up in the gallery, and he waves. You're not supposed to wave. And my son's waves, And as we go out in the hallway afterwards, my son Jack looks me right in the eyes and he says, "Someday, Dad, that'll be you."
Okay.
And I grabbed his hands and I said, "No, it won't. I know how these things work. Daddy's going to be a county executive, and that's it. I'm done. There's no path towards me doing anything like that." And he goes, "Dad, you got to believe." I didn't know what that meant. January, Beau Biden calls me. Out of the blue.
Okay.
January 28th, I think. He calls me, "Hey, Chris, how are you?" "Great, Beau, how you doing?" He goes, "I'm going skiing." I go, "Okay, go skiing, great. Got the family in the car." "Good for you." He says, "Oh, has my dad called you?" I said, "No. What are we talking about?" He goes, "Oh, well, something really big's about to happen." I said, "What are we talking about?" He goes, "Well, I'm going away for the weekend because I'm making an announcement on Monday that I am not going to run for his seat. Everyone expects me to run for his seat." I said, "What are we talking about?" He goes, "I think you ought to run for his seat." And I'm like, "What? I'm county executive. I'm not running for anything."
Right.
And he says, no. We've talked about it and thought about it. I'm in the middle of prosecuting this horrible pedophile in Georgetown, this pediatrician who abused all these kids. He goes, "I need to finish that. You should do this, not me." And then he hung up. His dad called, and he said, "I'd like you to run for my old seat." And then Governor Carper called, or Senator Carper called, right? And that was not an expected path. Sometimes things come to you unexpectedly.
Right.
And I jumped in, running against Mike Castle, who was a 2-term governor, 9-term congressman, had 95% name ID, 75% approval, and millions of dollars in the bank.
Yeah.
To say it was a long shot would be correct.
But
it worked out.
Because when God is for you, it doesn't matter what's against you.
Doesn't matter what's against you.
And I'm just so excited because when I was here then, I was here and I came in 2005, but I was here when the announcement came out that Beau was not going to run. When I heard that you would be the choice, nobody said that you would win, but this would be a great opportunity for you because you had done so well in the county exec spot. There were people who were cheering you. A lot of times you may not be the most popular, but you become the favorite because of what you've done. Even though you governed during some very challenging times, but it shows the toughness of a person. I think it's Dr. King who said that the fiber of a man is not determined during the time of their comfort, but during the time of their controversy. And you have certainly proven to be a strong person. We're going to get ready for another break, and I want to come back. I know I usually only have one segment or two.
You're going to edit this down.
But I'm not editing anything. This is just a great opportunity for us to have this great conversation with our senator, friend, and brother. But we're going to come back, and then we're going to talk about the national level and what's going on there, because I heard a little rumor that the president of the United States, I don't really say his name too much, 45, I believe that's his number, but he said that Joe Biden is going to be harmful to God. I couldn't understand that one. So maybe I'm going to pick the senator's brain to get me some understanding on that. We'll be right back. And we're back. You know, Senator, there's just so much is going on, and I'm so grateful to have you with us, and I'm just keep saying it because you have really been enlightening me greatly today. And before we get started, I want to take a moment just to reflect back on one of the great warriors of the movement, John Lewis, just transitioned just a few weeks ago, a month or so ago. And tell me your relationship with him and some of the things and interactions that you've had with him.
John was just a remarkable colleague in the Congress. My first year when I got elected, John Carney called me up and he said, "You have got to go on this annual congressional civil rights pilgrimage." I said, "Yeah, what are you talking about?" And he said, "There's this amazing group called Faith in Politics, and John helps lead it. And every year they go and spend 3 days, a whole weekend, and they typically visit Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma. And every year they change it up a little bit, but boy, it's amazing." I went that first year, and I found it just transformational. The chance to spend time with John, going to church together, having dinner together, being on a bus together. There was a small group that year. It wasn't a big anniversary or anything. There were probably 20 members of Congress who went. The total group might have been 40, 50 people. But I'd never been to Selma. We went to Brown Chapel AME, which is where all the marchers gathered before and after Bloody Sunday. We literally marched arm in arm halfway across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and then John stopped us and then had us kneel and pray and then talk to us about what that moment felt like for him as a young man when they crested the middle of that bridge and he could see this wall of troopers.
Yes.
And then the deputies who were just redneck thugs on horseback with clubs with barbed wire wrapped around it.
That's right.
And what it felt like he and Hosea to recognize that he might die that day, and to still have the courage to just go, okay, and march in. I mean, and then the thing about John in person, to watch him interact with other people and with me, was he was so kind and funny and warm and gracious. And I ended up going on 5 different trips with him. One year we went to Memphis and we visited the motel where Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Lorraine.
The Lorraine and the museum that's now attached to it. That's incredible. It gave me chills. They've turned into a part of it. You can go up into the balcony from which he was shot, and you can stand on the balcony where he was shot, and the bedroom is as if he's just stepped out. I mean, it was. And we went to the Masonic Lodge, the Masonic Temple, where he gave his, "I've been to the mountaintop, I may not make it to the promise," and we're literally sitting there.
Well, that's the Mason Temple Church of God in Christ.
Yes, sorry.
That's all right.
And one of the men who was a sanitation worker who was part of the strike and who was there that night and met him, spoke and talked in detail about his experience. Anyway, one year we went to Tuscaloosa. George Wallace's daughter talked about what it was like that day when her dad was standing in the doors and she was a little girl and her mom got her out of there, and how she felt about her father, and how she ultimately reconciled herself with the fact that her father was this horrible, hateful, racist man, but who had a conversion experience late in his life.
Amen.
And she sat on that gym floor next to the daughter of the African-American woman who was trying to get in the door, and the first student. They were talking about the legacy of that moment, of that history, of George Wallace, right? We went to South Carolina together after the Charleston AME, Mother Emanuel AME church shooting. And then John and I, along with the daughter of Bobby Kennedy, and 2 women who survived the shooting in Charleston, and a small group of members of Congress, we went to South Africa together to meet with some of the leaders of the liberation struggle there, to talk about reconciliation, to talk about how do you confront a history of violence and racism and white supremacy here and there, and how do you engage with it and wrestle with it and see it for what it is, and call it out as sin and sinfulness, and yet be able to move through it. And I don't know if this makes sense to you, but John Lewis, in his willingness to risk his life over and over and over for justice, and yet his open-heartedness and his kindness towards those who repent of their sinfulness and would come to him and seek some reconciliation or forgiveness. There was a former Klansman who came and talked to him at one of these events and said, "I'm the guy who beat you at Rocky Mount, North Carolina, when you were a freedom rider. And I'm here with my son." This was an old man by then. I mean, he was in his 80s. And he said, "I ask you to forgive me." And the two of them, he said, "I forgive you if you repent of your racism and sinful." And he said, "That's why I'm here. I'm not a Klansman anymore. I know what I did was wrong." And John and this man embraced each other and wept. John Lewis made me believe in the possibility of forgiveness.
Wow.
Even after all the ugliness and all the oppression and all the sinfulness of the actions by the white majority in this country over so many centuries now. But it also made it clear to me what is called for those of us in the majority in this country, the minority in South Africa, to do. And that was a huge gift. I would say that he's one of 3 living saints I've met who by their life and by their righteousness just made real the presence.
This is one of the reasons why I was so hurt with some of the things that President 45 engaged in. His unsympathetic spirit has created some strong harm in our community as well as in people of faith.
Yeah.
As I'm sitting here listening to you, when you're talking about it's amazing how John Lewis was able to forgive people who literally was trying to take his life. The Christian life requires that. A person walking out their faith, it's required. He was a good man. I didn't know him personally. I've had some interactions with him, but I'm very grateful for him. But to sit under a president who literally I should say, parade the Christian banner is hurtful. And I don't want to look at you at this time. I'll look at those who are watching us. I've been raised as a person who loved the ways of the evangelicals. And I've not really had an opportunity to say much because I don't want to ever harm the Christian community. But it is very hurtful for them to accept this man all because of their political issues and overlooking what they have stood for all of their time. We are supposed to be about Christ, not about this political stuff. And for me to hear some of the things they have condoned, embraced, that were totally against the will of the Lord that they serve, is just unbelievable. So I apologize for taking that moment, but for the first time, I'm saying publicly that it's going to be a whole lot of praying for me to ever be able to listen to another evangelical until they repent for what they permitted in this president. I want to go a little bit further. You filled the shoes of Joe Biden, and he was strong with bipartisanship. Are there some things you're working on or have worked on in Congress and the Senate that lends itself to bipartisanship?
Sure. One of the things I try to do to follow my predecessor, Joe Biden, in the Senate is to actually get to know my colleagues. And one of the things that helps with that a lot is we have a weekly prayer breakfast on Wednesday mornings that our chaplain leads, and that there are as many, if not more, Republicans than Democrats who go to it. It's about 24 of us on a Wednesday. It's an hour. It begins with a hymn, with prayer, with sharing of concerns, and then one of us stands up and just gives a witness about the role of faith in your life. And it is hard to dislike somebody or to throw a rhetorical punch at them on the floor when in the morning you've heard them talk about what it was like when their father died of cancer when they were a child, or how they came to their faith, and it has helped build relationships. Roger Wicker of Mississippi, one of the most conservative adult humans I've ever met, I mean, we disagree in terms of political policy on lots of things. We first got to know each other through that weekly prayer breakfast. He's a beautiful voice. He's a good tenor. And you know, we started off working together on chicken. There's a lot of chicken here, there's a lot of chicken there. We worked on some fishing issues. We have some seafood concerns, so do they. They raise a lot of catfish. We catch a lot of clams. You know, these are pretty neutral things you can work on. And he asked me to be his co-chair for the Malaria Prevention Caucus.
Okay.
Mississippi was the last state that had active malaria, and they have a research center, and I was going to Africa all the time. And so we did some malaria work together. Today, and this has been over 10 years, it took a while.
Right.
And I will tell you a secret, his favorite place to go on a getaway from Washington is Delaware.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
He loves Bethany Beach. We are the co-sponsors of a bill called Driving for Opportunity.
Okay.
Right now, it's got a dozen co-sponsors, Republicans and Democrats. It's sponsored by the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, but it's also sponsored by the Koch brothers network and by an evangelical prison fellowship.
Okay.
And it's a simple enough bill. It reverses a federal policy that's part of the war on drugs. It goes back to the 80s and 90s that says if you have an unpaid criminal fine, these are often the result of minor drug offenses, you should have your driver's license taken away. So it's not related to driver safety. It's not because you were a reckless driver or drunk driver. It's you have an unpaid, right? And there's 11 million Americans that have lost their driver's licenses under these circumstances. Why does this matter? If you lose your driver's license, you're going to lose your job.
That's right.
You're not going to be able to support your family.
Right.
We're putting you either further behind. And if you have a suspended license, often that means a police officer is going to, if they pull you over, it's going to turn into an interaction. The police in this environment are recognizing they should be doing fewer traffic stops that are not directly related to public safety. And for all the reasons we know about racist challenges in terms of policing and fairness, right? So that's a bipartisan bill that could pass in this environment. It could be signed by this president. He signed the First Step Act, which was a first step towards rolling back the three strikes bill, reducing mandatory minimums, putting money into, and frankly, that happened because Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, his father did federal jail time. And he got a window into. For me, it was the passion that came from my father's prison ministry when I was a child, his volunteering with the prison ministry. It was a bill that, you know, we had Tim Scott and Cory Booker advocating on. We can make bipartisan progress on things that are this big. On the big bill, the Justice in Policing Act,
Yes.
That is very broad and very active, that I call a prophetic bill, it's going to take a lot more before we get a bipartisan path forward on that one. But I try to simultaneously have a pragmatic bill that would impact people's lives that is bipartisan and have a prophetic bill that frankly is going to take a new president for us to make progress on.
Yeah, and sometimes the smaller things lead to the larger things. So we are very grateful
build
for
trust.
even sharing the smaller ones. But again, as you continue to work in Congress, you want to go forward. Are there some social issues that maybe we need to talk about while we're having our coffee this morning? Because, you know, I'm not that politician, I'm more the preacher, but today we want them to see the total Chris Coons. So there are some social issues that maybe we want to just tackle real quick.
Well, I mean, I'll go back to the previous point I made. I did a TV interview the other day where I got asked, well, you know, what are the religious issues in this election? And I talked about having a just immigration policy, dealing with climate change, you know, dealing with criminal justice, dealing with climate change, dealing with racism, and called out slavery as the founding sin of the country. And the reporter kind of said, well, that's not what I'm talking about. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the religious issues in an election, abortion and gay marriage. I said, I recognize that for tens of millions of Americans, those are the religious issues in an election. What I'm trying to say to you is they are not the only ones.
That's right.
The gospel does not say, thou shalt be Republican or Democrat.
Absolutely.
At all.
Absolutely.
We are trying in our failed and broken human way to take gospel principles and apply them in a current context. And that's always going to be a challenging prospect. So all I'm going to say is, I am engaged in an effort to try and clarify that there are many Democrats, both in the Senate and just in the world, for whom faith pushes us to be engaged in confronting racism, in having a more humane immigration policy in terms of how we welcome refugees and the stranger and the foreigner, seeing our role in the world as stewards of creation, and then having a calling to be better about creation care, finding ways to make our life and our world more just. I recognize they are not the only conclusions you can reach from the gospel. You could reach competing solutions in terms of what your core issues are, but to have those be the only two, I think is a narrow reading of what we're called to address.
And that's one of the reasons, that's one of my concerns with the evangelicals, because they're making it too narrow, because it always mesmerizes me that the Republican Party can say clearly abortion is a damnation against God, but they will not approve a bill to give a child health care.
Right.
That bothers me.
Right. Once born.
Yes.
You're on your
We don't care, but you just make sure it's born. And I think it speaks to the half gospel. I said this to one of my daughter goes to a Christian elementary school, and I shared this with the principal. The principal was quoting all of the laws of God, quote, 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 not knowing my role as a carrier of the gospel. And I looked him in the face and I said, "Sir, you understand the hand of God, but do not understand the heart of God." Yes, there were things that God said, thou shalt not, but he sent his son so that his son would fulfill, because we could not live up to. And all too often we get these social issues confused, and when we are on a certain platform, I just can't understand why we can't handle the gun control. I don't understand what is the real issue here. I know what the real issue is, but yet we can say we need Donald Trump, I said his name, for abortion rights. We need him for gun rights. We need him so that our courts will be so conservative that our two issues will always be at the front. That's foul. That is not appropriate.
Well, and it's missing the consequences that are coming with it. If you look at the regulatory agenda of the Trump federal judiciary and federal government, they are rolling back protections, case law and regulations that got built up over decades to provide for clean water and clean air. Most Americans go, yeah, okay, whatever. But seriously, in a community so impacted by environmental justice concerns as Southbridge, to say it's just okay to roll back everything that was done for 20 years to combat environmental injustices, to combat pollution in air and water, I think is missing the consequences on people and the consequences on the planet. So if you're going to pull out three things and say these are the only things that matter, everything else is commentary, I think you're misreading. I think you're taking Deuteronomy and Leviticus and saying this is the text, and I think you're ignoring the epistles and the gospels and saying, yeah.
That's exactly where I am. Yes.
This shows a different arc and a different intention, I think, than a narrow and a priestly and a you must follow this rule and this law. We are not still in a world where we rely on priests to sacrifice doves and bulls, and the one complete, full, and ultimate sacrifice has been made.
Yes.
And then the question is, how will we view and treat each other? And to me, John Lewis was one of the strongest, most challenging examples I've seen of how will we treat each other. And if you were comfortable living in and working in a society where there were signs on the doors that said whites only, coloreds only, for schools and for hospitals, and you were okay with that, and you called yourself a Christian as a white person, you are not reading the Gospels I'm reading.
At all, yes.
And to suggest that resolving that and addressing it isn't the number one faith issue means you're just not dealing with where we really are.
you have just become so political that you don't really care about the gospel?
I was out in Hockessin a week or 2 weeks ago, where we were celebrating the stabilization and the preservation of one of the schools that was a segregated school in Delaware. This is not in history books. And there were a dozen folks who'd gone to school in that school. This was an apartheid state. This was a state with legal segregation within living memory of people who are still walking around. So this isn't something that happened 200 years ago. No. This isn't something that's absent and remote. This is something, the consequences of which is right here today. So I don't think it's a really tough interpretive leap to see the gospel in that light. And to the point you made earlier about evangelicals, I do think I have had a number of conversations with evangelical pastors who are white evangelicals and debated this exact thing and said, this is the time for you to say, we see racism as sin, not just as how things used to be. It's sinful. It disrespects creation. It treats each other as some are more and less a child of God. And you've got to confront that. If you don't confront that, then I have a hard time with. We should all approach judging each other with humility.
Yes.
As I look at Republican colleagues, and I am filled with, it is a challenge for me to understand how they can support certain policies. I try to have humility about that. I try to never say, well, I know that person's not a Christian. That's not my place to do. Right, when politicians go after each other over you don't really read, you don't really know, that's not mine to do. But the consequences of others, the policies that you support, the way it impacts real people, their children, their families, that I'm much more comfortable saying, what are you doing?
Absolutely. Well, then I might as well ask this question because it's interesting. So do you or do you not support, the president has a right to want to go to worship. He has a right.
Of course.
But the protesters were in his way. He has a right as president to get them out of his way. Or is that, I'm confused, Mr. Senator. I mean, he has a right to go to worship. He wanted to get to worship.
He was not going to worship.
Oh, he wasn't going to worship?
No.
Talk to me. So
there have been public interviews with the rector and the priest. So St. John's Episcopal, which is this iconic, it's a pale yellow, beautiful 19th century church that is right across Lafayette Square from the White House. He made no outreach. He did not call. No one from the White House called and said the president would like to come visit. He would like to pray with you. He'd like to share anything. There was no outreach. It was just a building being used as a backdrop. And look, if law enforcement broadcasts an announcement and says, this demonstration has become violent, you're beginning to destroy property for reasons of health and public safety, we ask that everyone, stop being. There is a difference between peaceful demonstrations and violence and rioting and destroying property. But that's not what happened here.
Right.
The White House decided that the president should do a photo op in front of a church. They did not give protesters plenty of time and say, look, within 2 hours we're going to, right? They just said, okay, we're clearing this out. And used tear gas and rubber bullets to do so. Dragged along the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in uniform, which he subsequently said, I wasn't informed about what we were doing. I should not have been there. It was not appropriate for troops to be used or for him to be used in that way. Former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, a 4-star decorated Marine Corps general, wrote a blistering essay afterwards that I think is worth reading. If President Trump, our president, chooses to go to church and to worship, to kneel, to read, of course, I welcome that. I have literally prayed with and for President Trump, with him, on 2 occasions at the National Prayer Breakfast. And I pray for him every time I pray because we are called to pray for our leaders. And that is not just running down a list of the names of, so-and-so, so-and-so, so. That means you have to hold them in your heart and wish for them a connection to God and an open-heartedness. Now, I'll remind you, I think for him to fully have his heart open would also mean to confront. If he really knew God,
Right.
that'd be a painful moment.
Yes.
Because you'd have to confront the consequences of some of the things he's doing.
Right.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but it was the next day, Joe Biden called the pastor of an AME church here
Right.
and said, would you mind if I came? I would like to come to listen, to kneel, to read, and to hear. That's a very different terms on which to come to a church.
Right.
To the point you made earlier about a funeral that was here.
Yes.
If you're elected, you should treat places of worship not as backdrops,
Absolutely.
but as places of worship. If you're at a funeral, if you're at a religious service, if you're at a gathering, I think you ought to have a certain humility about the context.
Absolutely. We're running out of time, so what I want to do real quick. No, I've enjoyed this conversation.
I'm going on.
But before we go, I want to give you're our friend here at Zion Fair. You're my friend as pastor of this church, and those who follow me. I want to give you a chance to share with us. You're running for your seat again, re-election. Please, at this time, share with those to support you in whatever way you want to share it.
Well, thank you. I'd be grateful to anyone who is watching or listening. I'd appreciate your prayers.
Yes.
I'd appreciate you holding me in your heart as someone who has hard decisions to make all the time and recognizes I do not always make them right or well. And that just as you also have a walk that is at times clear and strong and purposeful, and at other times things that are human get in the way, I'd be grateful for your holding me in prayer. If it seems to you that I am the kind of person who would represent you well, who would fight for Delaware, fight for Southbridge, fight for in every way the concerns of those who maybe don't feel represented in the current environment, I'd appreciate your vote, and I'd be grateful for a chance to represent you again. The Senate is a remarkable institution. It is at the moment badly broken. We do not hear each other and see each other as much as we should. And I am in the minority. That limits how much I can actually get done, but it also forces me to work across the aisle if I want any bill that I write to become law. And I think I have done as well as anyone could have in the time that I've been there, both when President Obama and Vice President Biden were in leadership and with President Trump. I've got dozens of bills that have become law. I've got dozens more that are not yet law.
Okay.
And more than anything, what brings me joy in my service is the 5 people in my office who answer constituent concerns. I don't want to go before I say our office number is 573-6345. I'll say that again, it's 573-6345. And my website is coons.senate.gov. And whether it is an issue with Medicare or Medicaid, with veterans benefits, with immigration, with housing, anything that touches Social Security, anything that touches on the federal government, we delight in having the chance to go fight for you. That, at the end of the day, it's not going to be the signing pen from the president and the bill on the wall that is the measure of whether I've done my job well. It's thousands of cases of individuals who couldn't get their disability check, who couldn't get the permission to bury their late husband in the veterans cemetery, who couldn't get clarity about why they're not getting their Medicaid benefit. That's what makes this worth doing.
Thank you so very much. And I want to say, as the trusted pastor who has certainly served you well, that I want to see this giant return to the Senate, and I hope and trust that you would take his words. I vouch for him. He has been a friend. He did not show up just this time. As a matter of fact, we engaged him to come and have this cup of coffee with us. We believe in him. We strongly support him, and we're asking all of you, whether you be Zion Fair or the community, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you are, support my friend, our Senator, Chris Coons. God bless you.